September 19th, 1918. Deep in a muddy trench on the Western Front, an American soldier grips a weapon that's causing absolute chaos among German forces. 6 rapid-fire blasts. 6 seconds. An entire enemy squad neutralized before they even process what hit them. The weapon? Not some high-tech military innovation, not some secret government project, but a hunting shotgun, a duck gun, modified by a Mormon gunsmith from a dusty workshop in Utah, who most military experts had dismissed as just another backwoods tinkerer. Germany was so terrified of this weapon that their government filed an official diplomatic protest, threatening to execute any American soldier caught carrying one. They called it inhumane. They called it a war crime. They demanded it be banned under international law. But here's the twist. This so-called war crime, it was just a pump-action shotgun, the same basic design farmers used to hunt birds. So what made it so devastating that an entire military empire wanted it erased from existence? Today, we're diving into the incredible true story of John Moses Browning, the mad genius who turned a simple hunting tool into one of the most feared weapons of World War I. A weapon that changed warfare forever and whose basic design is still used by military and police forces around the world over a century later. This is the story of the Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. And trust me, it's way more fascinating than you think. To understand how a hunting gun became a military legend, we need to go back to January 23, 1855, in Ogden, Utah, a small frontier town where a boy named John Moses Browning was born into a world of gunpowder and steel. John's father, Jonathan Browning, was a self-taught gunsmith who had traveled from Tennessee to Utah as part of the Mormon migration. Jonathan wasn't just any craftsman. He was a true innovator, designing and building custom firearms in his modest workshop. Young John grew up surrounded by the smell of gun oil, the sound of hammering metal, and the mechanical puzzle of how firearms actually worked. But here's what's remarkable. John Browning didn't attend engineering school. He didn't have formal training. He didn't study at prestigious universities. He learned by watching his father, by taking apart every gun he could get his hands on, and by spending countless hours in that workshop experimenting with designs that existed only in his mind. At age 13, John built his first functioning firearm from scrap metal. 13 years old. Most kids that age are still figuring out basic algebra. John Browning was designing and constructing working weapons. By age 24, in 1879, he received his first patent for a breech-loading single-shot rifle. And this is where the story gets interesting. A Winchester repeating arms representative heard rumors about this young Mormon gunsmith in Utah who was building innovative rifles. They sent someone to investigate. What they found shocked them. John Browning had designed a rifle that was simpler, more reliable, and more efficient than anything Winchester's own engineers had developed. Winchester immediately bought the design and manufactured it as the Winchester Model 1885 single-shot. It became an instant commercial success. This started a partnership that would change firearms history. But unlike most inventor-manufacturer relationships, Browning didn't just hand over designs and walk away. He became obsessed with improvement, with refinement, with solving problems that other designers didn't even recognize as problems. Between 1883 and the early 1900s, John Browning designed rifle after rifle for Winchester. The Model 1886 lever-action, the Model 1890 pump-action rifle, the Model 1892, the Model 1894, which became one of the most popular hunting rifles in American history, with over 7 million produced. But Browning wasn't content with just rifles. He saw a gap in the market. Shotguns existed, but they were clunky, unreliable, and difficult to operate under pressure. Most shotguns of the era were break-action designs that required you to manually open the gun, eject spent shells, reload, and close the action before firing again. Slow, inefficient, impractical for any situation requiring rapid fire. Browning had a vision. What if you could pump a shotgun's action smoothly and rapidly, ejecting and loading rounds in one continuous motion? What if you could turn a shotgun into a weapon capable of sustained, rapid fire while maintaining perfect reliability? The military experts said it couldn't be done. Too many moving parts, too prone to jamming, too complicated for field conditions. John Browning said, "Watch me." In 1893, John Browning introduced his first pump-action shotgun design for Winchester, the Model 1893. It worked, but it had limitations. It was designed for black powder shells, which were rapidly becoming obsolete. The gun couldn't handle the more powerful smokeless powder cartridges that were becoming the new standard. Browning went back to the drawing board. He didn't just modify the 1893, he completely reimagined it, strengthened it, refined every mechanical component. 4 years later, in 1897, Winchester released the improved design, the Winchester Model 1897. Let me describe what made this weapon revolutionary. First, the pump-action mechanism. A single action bar connected to a sliding fore-end. One smooth motion backward ejected the spent shell. One smooth motion forward chambered a fresh round and locked the bolt. It was intuitive. A soldier or hunter could operate it blindfolded after minimal training. Second, the external hammer design. Yes, it looked old-fashioned compared to later internal hammer designs. But that external hammer had a crucial advantage. You could visually confirm whether the weapon was cocked. In combat, that split-second confirmation could mean the difference between life and death. Third, the tubular magazine held 5 shells, with one more in the chamber. 6 rounds of devastating close-range firepower. But here's where things get truly interesting. The Model 1897 had a design feature that Browning probably never intended for military purposes. It lacked a trigger disconnector. In most modern firearms, the trigger disconnects when you pump the action. You have to release the trigger and pull it again for each shot. Safety feature. Standard design. The Model 1897 didn't have this. If you held the trigger down and just kept pumping the action, the gun would fire every single time the bolt locked into place. This technique became known as slam firing. Pump, boom, pump, boom, pump, boom, pump, boom, pump, boom, pump, boom. 6 shots in approximately 6 seconds if you were fast. Even average users could empty the magazine in under 10 seconds. For hunters, this was an interesting feature, but not particularly crucial. For military combat in confined spaces, this was a game-changer. The Model 1897 became Winchester's best-selling shotgun. Farmers bought it for hunting. Law enforcement agencies bought it for security. Sport shooters bought it for competition. Between 1897 and 1957, when production finally ended, Winchester manufactured over 1 million Model 1897 shotguns in various configurations. But in 1897, nobody could have predicted what would happen too. Decades later, when this hunting shotgun would find its way into the muddy hell of World War I trenches. Jump forward to 1914. Europe explodes into World War I. What military? Strategists predicted would be a quick, mobile war of rapid movements and decisive victories, instead devolved into something nobody anticipated. Trench warfare. Millions of soldiers dug into the earth, creating elaborate networks of trenches stretching across France and Belgium. No man's land between opposing trenches became a death zone. Machine guns dominated. Artillery bombardments destroyed entire landscapes. Soldiers lived in mud, disease, and constant terror. And then there was close combat. When soldiers went over the top or when enemy forces breached trenches, warfare became medieval. Bayonets, clubs, knives, brutal, desperate, face-to-face killing. Standard military rifles like the bolt-action Springfield or Lee Enfield were excellent for long-range combat. But in the confines of a trench, where enemy soldiers appeared suddenly around corners, in narrow corridors, in dugouts and bunkers. These long rifles became clumsy, slow, ineffective. Soldiers needed something different, something that delivered massive close-range firepower instantly, something that didn't require perfect aim when an enemy emerged 3 feet away in a dark, muddy tunnel. The United States entered World War I in April 1917. American military planners studied reports from British and French forces who had been fighting for 3 years. They recognized the unique challenges of trench warfare. And someone, somewhere in the U.S. Military Procurement Office, remembered the Winchester Model 1897 shotgun, not the standard hunting version. They needed a modified military version. Winchester got the contract and began producing the Model 1897 trench gun specification. Here's what made the military version different. A shortened barrel, just 20 inches long instead of the standard hunting length of 28 to 30 inches. Perfect for maneuvering in tight spaces. The short barrel also created a wider spread pattern for the buckshot, increasing hit probability in close quarters. A ventilated steel heat shield wrapped around the barrel. After rapid-firing multiple shells, shotgun barrels get hot, extremely hot. Hot enough to burn your hand if you accidentally touched it. The heat shield allowed soldiers to steady their aim without burning themselves. And the most intimidating addition, a bayonet lug. Yes, you could mount a full-size bayonet on this shotgun. Imagine facing an enemy soldier wielding a weapon that could blast you with 6 rapid buckshot rounds or stab you with 18 inches of sharpened steel. The ammunition? Military-grade 12-gauge buckshot shells. Each shell contained 9 hardened pellets of antimony-treated ore-zero buckshot. Each pellet was roughly .33 caliber. Fire 1 shell, and 9 projectiles spread out in a devastating pattern. Fire 6 shells in 6 seconds? 54 projectiles filling the air in a confined space. Let me put that in perspective. A skilled rifleman with a bolt-action rifle might fire 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute in combat conditions. A soldier with a Model 1897 trench gun could put 54 projectiles downrange in under 10 seconds. The U.S. Army ordered approximately 30,000 Model 1897 trench guns. They trained specialized shotgun units. Soldiers selected for these weapons received specific training in slam-firing techniques, ammunition management, and close-quarters combat tactics. And then these weapons arrived in France, in the trenches, in the hands of American soldiers who were about to show German forces something they'd never experienced before. The first American combat units. Equipped with Model 1897, trench guns entered the front lines in late 1917 and early 1918. Initially, German soldiers didn't know what to make of these strange, short-barreled weapons. That confusion didn't last long. Imagine you're a German soldier. You've survived 3 years of this hell. Machine gun fire, artillery barrages, gas attacks. You know how combat works. You know what to expect. Then one night, during a trench raid, you hear something different. Not the crack of rifle fire. Not the rattle of a machine gun. A deep, thunderous boom. Then another, and another. Rapid succession. And in that confined trench space, amplified by mud walls, it sounds like the world is exploding. Your squad mates are falling. Not from single rifle shots, but from clouds of pellets that hit multiple targets simultaneously. A weapon that doesn't require perfect aim because it fills the entire space with lead. And then you see the American soldier wielding it, pumping that action with terrifying speed. Boom, pump, boom, pump. 6 shots before you can even chamber a second round in your bolt-action rifle. German forces quickly learned to fear the trench gun. They called it the trench broom or the trench sweeper. Soldiers reported that a single American with a trench gun could clear an entire section of trench, taking out multiple defenders before they could effectively respond. But the psychological impact was even more significant than the physical damage. Combat is as much about morale as it is about bullets. when you know the enemy has a weapon that can kill you and everyone around you in seconds, when you hear that distinctive sound echoing through the trenches. Fear becomes a weapon itself. Reports from American soldiers praised the weapon. One report noted that shotguns were particularly effective in trench raids and defensive situations. When German forces attempted counter-raids or breakthrough attacks, American defenders with trench guns could hold positions that would have been overrun if armed only with standard rifles. The effective range was limited. Beyond about 40 to 50 yards, the buckshot spread too wide to be reliably effective. But in trench warfare, most combat happened at ranges of 20 yards or less, often much less. The trench gun was designed for exactly this scenario. And here's something fascinating: the psychological deterrent effect. German soldiers who survived encounters with trench guns spread stories throughout their units. The weapon's reputation grew. Some German forces became hesitant to engage in close quarters fighting against American units known to be equipped with shotguns. But Germany's response wasn't just battlefield adaptation. They took it to the international stage. On September 14, 1918, the German government filed an official diplomatic protest through neutral Switzerland directed at the United States government. The protest was extraordinary. Germany claimed that the use of shotguns violated Article 23E of the 1907 Hague Convention, which prohibited weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering. They argued that buckshot caused wounds that were excessively painful and difficult to treat. They demanded that the United States immediately cease using shotguns in combat. And then came the real threat. Any American soldier captured while carrying a shotgun would be executed, not held as a prisoner of war. They would be treated as war criminals. Think about the irony for a moment. This protest came from a nation that had pioneered military use of flamethrowers, poison gas, unrestricted submarine warfare against civilian ships, artillery bombardments of civilian cities. But a shotgun? That was too inhumane. The U.S. response to Germany's protest was swift and uncompromising. Secretary of State Robert Lansing personally reviewed the complaint. The War Department analyzed the legal arguments. And their conclusion? Germany's protest was completely invalid. The official American response, delivered through diplomatic channels, made several key points. First, shotguns didn't violate any provision of the Hague Convention. The convention prohibited weapons causing unnecessary suffering, defined as weapons causing injury disproportionate to military necessity. Buckshot caused immediate severe wounds, but so did rifle bullets, shrapnel, and every other standard weapon of warfare. There was nothing uniquely cruel about shotgun wounds. Second, and this part was particularly pointed, the U.S. response noted that Germany's use of poison gas, flamethrowers, and other weapons far exceeded any potential humanitarian concerns about shotguns. The protest seemed less about humanitarian law and more about military effectiveness. Third, the threat to execute prisoners was itself a clear violation of international law. The United States issued a counter-warning. If Germany executed any American prisoners for carrying shotguns, the U.S. would consider this a war crime and respond accordingly. Germany never executed any captured American soldiers for possessing shotguns. The protest died quietly. The war ended just 2 months later, on November 11, 1918. But the controversy revealed something important. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun had achieved something rare in military history. It had become so effective, so feared, that an enemy nation attempted to ban it through diplomatic means rather than simply developing countermeasures. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Of the approximately 30,000 trench guns produced for World War I, only about 3,000 actually made it to France before the armistice. Yet those 3,000 weapons created enough impact that Germany filed an international protest. After the war, military analysts studied the trench gun's effectiveness. Reports were mixed, but generally positive. Some units found them invaluable. Others preferred standard rifles for versatility. But almost everyone agreed. In close-quarters combat, nothing matched the trench gun's ability to deliver rapid, devastating firepower. The U.S. military kept the Model 1897 in inventory. When World War II erupted, guess what weapon they pulled out of storage? The same Winchester Model 1897 trench guns from World War I, plus new production models. American Marines used them extensively in the Pacific Theater, particularly in jungle warfare and cave-clearing operations where close combat was common. The trench gun saw action in Korea, Vietnam. Even into the 1960s and 70s, some military units still carried modified versions. Law enforcement agencies adopted it for riot control and security operations. The basic design proved so reliable that some Model 1897 shotguns remained in active service over 70 years after manufacture. So what's the lasting legacy of John Moses Browning's design? Why does a weapon designed in 1897 still matter in 2024? First, the Model 1897 established the pump-action shotgun as the standard for tactical and defensive firearms. Every modern pump shotgun, from police riot guns to home defense weapons, traces its design lineage back to Browning's innovation. Second, it proved that existing civilian technology could be rapidly adapted for military purposes. The military version of the Model 1897 wasn't a radical redesign. It was a shorter barrel, a heat shield, and a bayonet lug. Simple modifications that transformed a hunting tool into a combat weapon. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it changed how militaries think about close-quarters combat. Before the trench gun, close combat was an afterthought. Bayonets and handguns were backup weapons, not primary tools. The Model 1897 demonstrated that specialized weapons for specific combat scenarios could provide decisive advantages. John Moses Browning himself didn't live to see the full legacy of his designs. He died in 1926 at age 71 while working in his workshop, still designing firearms. Over his lifetime, he received 128 firearm patents. His designs include the M1911 pistol, still in use today, the Browning automatic rifle, the M2 Browning machine gun, which has been in continuous military service since 1933, the Auto 5 semi-automatic shotgun. But the Model 1897 holds a special place in that legacy. It was a design so effective that an enemy tried to ban it, so reliable that it served in combat for over 70 years, so influential that it defined an entire category of firearms. Today, original Winchester Model 1897 trench guns are collector's items. A military-marked World War I example can sell for anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on condition. Some museums display them as artifacts of military history. Some shooting enthusiasts still use them over a century after manufacture. And here's the remarkable thing. The basic design still works. Modern manufacturing has added improvements, better materials, tighter tolerances, but the fundamental mechanism that John Browning developed in his Utah workshop remains effective and relevant. From a Mormon gunsmith's workshop in Utah to the muddy trenches of France. From a hunting shotgun to a weapon so feared that it sparked an international diplomatic incident. From 1897 to today, influencing over a century of firearms design, the Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. Proof that sometimes the most revolutionary innovations don't come from massive research facilities or military development programs. Sometimes they come from one brilliant mind, working in a small workshop, obsessed with solving a problem that nobody else thought needed solving. John Moses Browning transformed a hunting gun into a battlefield game-changer. And in doing so, he changed warfare itself.